Good evening, everyone. I'm Claudia Tobin. Welcome to the Royal Drawing School's Summer Creative Conversation and Lecture Series. I'm really delighted to welcome the curators and art historians Tom Henry and Ben Thomas this evening. They're joining us to discuss the current Raphael exhibition at the National Gallery. And I'm sure the exhibition has already been an inspiration to many in our audience. So it's really wonderful to have two specialists on Raphael here with us to reflect on the artist's importance and how the exhibition fits into a series of initiatives that have tried to bring us closer to an understanding of his work. So just to introduce our speakers a little further, Ben Thomas was the co-curator of Raphael, the drawings at the Ashmolean Museum in 2017, an exhibition which won the Apollo Exhibition of the Year award. And his recent books include Raphael and the Eloquence of Drawing, Edgar and Modern Art, In Defence of Marginal Anarchy, and Humphrey Ocean. And he is a reader in art history at the University of Kent. Professor Tom Henry co-curated the National Gallery Raphael exhibition, and he's previously curated the exhibition Late Raphael at the Prado and Louvre in 2012-13. He's also published an extensive study of the life and art of Luca Signorelli, also in 2012. So welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us. Hopefully you'll appear in a moment. Wonderful. Hi Ben, hi Tom. Thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on a really wonderful exhibition. And just before you begin, just to remind everyone listening that you're really welcome to ask questions and write those in the Q&A box, and we'll come to those at the end. But yes, a warm welcome to you both.
Thank you, Claudia. It's great to be here, and fantastic to be able to have this discussion with Ben. We've been friends and colleagues for a long time with very closely shared interests, and so it seems a very good moment to reflect on the different approaches that we've brought to Raphael, an artist who we both love, and of course an artist for whom drawing is absolutely fundamental. And of course, one can also reference, I think, the Royal Collection of drawings by Raphael as being really fundamental to the study of the artist in Britain. The way Ben and I have said we would do this conversation is that I would kind of tee up some citing shots about what the exhibition was trying to do. Then Ben and I will try and talk a little bit about it. And that will lead us into, I think, reflections on his exhibition of 2017 as well. So if we can go forward one slide, please. This is really just the first room of the exhibition as a way to introduce that I'm going to spend the next few minutes. I can't assume that everybody has yet seen this show, just setting out what we tried to do and how I would situate it in the litany of Raphael exhibitions that have been held in recent years. In addition to the exhibition that Claudia referenced of 2012-13, which I curated with Paul Joanides for the Prado and the Louvre on Late Raphael. Earlier than that, in 2003-4, I had curated with Carol Platt-Sotter of the National Gallery and Hugo Chapman of the British Museum, Raphael from Urbino to Rome, which was also at the National Gallery, and was firmly envisaged as about his stylistic, physical, actual, but also developmental journey in the early part of his life, as we called it, from Urbino to Rome. And that very much reflected the strengths of the National Gallery collection. Their latest painting is dated 1511, and they have 10 paintings all before that date, meaning it's very easy to represent Raphael's early career in London. The later career is much more difficult. In fact, the holdings of that are principally in Rome, Paris, and Madrid. So when we decided to put on this exhibition, Gabriele Finaldi approached me and then David Exurgent to do this. If we go forward one more slide, This is put in really as a reminder that exhibitions are always a team effort. I've referenced a lot of names already. I'm afraid I must reference some more. So there is a full-scale reproduction of the School of Athens in the fourth room of the exhibition. We declared that this was the selfie wall, and we have now taken our own selfie here, me in the middle, with as I look at this screen, to the left, my co-curator, David Exurgin, behind him, a curator from Berlin who was delivering a painting, and then to the right, the two in-house curators of the National Gallery who made David and I's job as curators so much easier. In the front there, Matthias Vivel, and behind him, Maria Alambritis. So this is here really as a reminder of the team effort that it takes to put on an exhibition like this. And if we go forward one more slide, which takes us again to the first room of the show, you can see that we're in big upstairs rooms, not the Sainsbury Wing exhibition spaces that have been used for so many exhibitions in recent years. And I referenced that one thing we felt we were able to do in 2000, and this was planned for 2020, but of course happened in 2022, was to push beyond Raphael's early career and try to cover the whole career. And once we'd made that decision, our ambition became, how can we go beyond the exhibitions of 2003 to 4 and 2012 in Paris and Madrid? And what we decided we would try to do was to try to do the whole career in all of its outputs, unadulterated by matters of influence. Of course, Raphael was influenced by Leonardo, Michelangelo, Signorelli, to name just a few, and also unmuddied by issues of workshop collaboration. And again, of course, he had a workshop from his very first work right through until his death. But we wanted people to get a clear idea of, or a single idea of how Raphael developed across his life. And all the outputs element is also important here, and that will be seen in some of these later slides. So those were the guiding principles. If we go forward one more slide, we're now in the second room, which we called Florence and Beyond. Typically, this period of Raphael's career is called his Florentine period, but so much of the work that he did in that time was actually executed for other cities that we wanted to slightly challenge that notion. And in particular, the altarpiece that's pride of place in this display straight ahead of us in this slide, the Ansidei Madonna, was painted for Perugia, as were a number of other works, either in this room or we had drawings showing the planning of other Umbrian works. That was very important to us to slightly challenge the notion of a Florentine period. If we go forward again, this is out of sequence in a way, but it is the vista you get from this room, and I thought it was so magnificent you have to show this vista. The Santa Cecilia altarpiece from Bologna, which I will pause on when we get a little bit further through these slides, is first seen from this second room of the exhibition, and in a way acts as a spine right through the show to kind of pull you through. And there are both huge stylistic changes, but also great elements of continuity. And I thought that was very inspiring. Again, if we go forward one slide, the next room was designed as a room of Madonnas. I'm concentrating here on the room on the wall which has the great Alba Madonna from Washington, with a sensational drawing from Lille to its right, and the National Gallery's own Guevara Madonna to the left. And going forward one slide again, the Washington painting here, I'm afraid without its rather spectacular frame, is just so interesting in the way Raphael is thinking about designing for a circular format, This picture may have been executed for the sacristy of St. Peter's as a gift from Pope Julius II, and it is then removed from Rome during the sack of Rome in 1527. So it has a very interesting history. And like so many of Raphael's Madonna pictures of this date, he's interested in the play between the Christ child and his cousin, St. John the Baptist, so often featuring on reflections about his own premonition of his death on the cross through effectively grasping in his hand the cross that the Baptist is also identified by. Forward once again. This room was split in two to also lead through to a room with some bronzes, which I'm going to pause on a bit later. But I also like that this shows the Tempi Madonna with the beautifully sweet and intimate relationship between the Madonna and child on the right, clearly looking at Donatello as he was planning this. And also I like the fact that we have so many circular forms in this set of rooms. So another tondo circular picture on the kind of middle ground. And then of course the bronzes I'm going to talk about later are also circular. Forward again, and we land in the fourth room, which was dedicated to Julius II and his projects in the Vatican. Clearly frescoes are the one thing that are impossible for us to bring to London, and therefore the ambition to cover all the outputs had to be done in a different way. We did this through preparatory drawings, the spectacular large preparatory cartoon on the left-hand side, and then you can just see slightly cut off on the right the reproduction of the School of Athens that I mentioned earlier. Moving on from this room, we come to a room of grand designs, and it introduces again this sense of Raphael designing for other media. Here, a great tapestry discovered in a private collection in Madrid in the last 25 years, now in the Museum of Decorative Arts, Madrid, and the painting on which it was modeled, shown to the left-hand side, a painting that I'm going to come back to. And if we go to the next slide again, other paintings in this room, kind of turning around the room effectively, take one through export art, so pictures he was sending other places. Literally the three pictures we can see here were sent to Carpi, Bologna, and Naples. So the sense of Raphael as an exporting artist, I think, is strong. And if we go forward one more slide, in the second half of this room, we dealt with Raphael as archaeologist, with his famous letter to Leo X, where he describes his archaeological method as well as many other things, but also drawings and prints that show exactly how he was approaching the antique, and in a very serious, some would say, as serious an archaeologist any before the 20th century. This room also had a great deal to do with prints and design for prints and design for other objects. I probably won't go into that in great detail now, but it is absolutely the theme of what we were trying to do in the exhibition. Instead, I'll go forward one slide to the architecture room. Architecture, of course, posed another great problem for us. How do you represent it? We chose to do it with a model of the Palazzo Brancone dell'Aquila, which you see straight ahead, with some video footage and with a sequence of drawings, and some of those I'm going to come back to. I think if I was self-critiquing the exhibition, I think it's very important to include Raphael's architects, and I think this little room is effective. But I think it's the one place where the decision not to include works by other artists was a compromise for us, because the more I got to understand Raphael's architectural practice, and by understand that, what I really mean is immerse myself in Caroline Elam's brilliant essay in the catalogue, the more I understood that architecture was perhaps the one thing he had to delegate. He was not a specialist, or could not always be a specialist draftsman in this sphere. And so here we probably should have had some other artists, effectively his amanuensis, involved in the exhibition. Going forward from architecture, we've seen one great tapestry. The project, as you might imagine, was extremely loan dependent. I'm very pleased that we got so much of what we asked for, but there were some things that if we lost, in a way, the concept behind the exhibition would have failed, and we would have had to redesign what we were intending to do. And I thought one of those was really the Sistine Chapel tapestries. So we have one here, St. Paul preaching in Athens, of the set of tapestries that Raphael designed to hang below the 15th century frescoes and below Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling in, let's call it, the most important chapel in Christendom, certainly at the time. And it's such an important project for Raphael, such an important project for his now new papal patron, Leo X, and such extraordinary works of art, extraordinarily expensive. Each one cost as much as the Sistine Chapel ceiling earned for Michelangelo in a 4-year period, richly woven with gold threads and other colors, and famously based, of course, on full-scale tapestry cartoons made by Raphael in the Victoria and Albert Museum. And here we were showing a facsimile, and there is, of course, a whole debating issue about including facsimiles in with other works of art in an exhibition context. I felt it was very powerful here, showing him designing and how that translation was affected into tapestry. But I also firmly hoped that it would further encourage people to go down the road to the Victoria and Albert Museum and see the newly installed tapestry cartoons. I might add that they were objects that could never have travelled from the V&A to the National Gallery, and so a loan of the actual object was out of the question. Now, the other picture in this room, if you go forward a slide, sorry, there is zooming in on the tapestry, and if we go forward one more, already referenced the great ecstasy of St. Catherine, of St. Cecilia from Bologna. This picture has only left Bologna 3 times before: for the Rome exhibition on Raphael in 2020, for the exhibition in Paris and Madrid in 2012, and when Napoleon took it to Paris in 1798. So to have it come to London is something I never dreamt I would see. And if I revert to when we were planning the 2003-4 exhibition, I should mention that we never imagined at that point that some of these later pictures that we were able to achieve the loan of for this occasion could ever have been lent. So it's a measure of how things have changed. I said I'd dwell on this picture. I don't want to hog too much space, but the beautiful compositional design, the sense of how earthly music cannot compete with heavenly music, which is why instruments are either broken or falling apart, is just such a powerful piece of design. The picture was monumentally influential on Bolognese art for the next 2 centuries at least. I'm getting close to my little bit, so going close to the end of my little bit, going further forward again. Our last room was portraits, a spectacular gathering of Raphael and his friends. Just this wall alone, I think the phrase is worth the admission fee. And if I zoom in on some of these, the next slide is Bindo Altoviti, a wonderful loan from the National Gallery of Art in Washington, a young man, very rich young man, but a man with whom Raphael evidently felt completely socially at ease. And then to end my little canter through the exhibition, his close friend Baldassare Castiglione in this spectacular portrait from the Louvre, a symphonies of blacks and greys and textures, with then these piercing blue eyes illuminating from the center of the picture. I've reached the end of my bit. I hope I've stimulated questions in you, and I'm sure I've stimulated thoughts and questions in Ben.
Yes, thank you, Tom. I mean, first of all, just to say what a fantastic show it is, and how deeply impressive it is as an overview, as you say, of Raphael's achievement. And that last wall, to see those three amazing portraits together on the same wall is, as you say, worth the admission price alone. I always thought the Castiglione portrait was the greatest Renaissance portrait, better even than the Mona Lisa, though that's probably a controversial opinion. But when you see it alongside
if
him,
I second you, then it's not controversial.
Okay, thank you for that, Tom. But I'm sure Leonardo scholars would disagree with us. But it's, I mean, and the Saint Cecilia altarpiece, which I know from knowing Bologna very well and have seen in Bologna, but it looks transformed in this show by the context and seeing other great works by Raphael alongside it, as indeed a number of other works were transformed. The St. Catherine has been reframed, and that looks like a completely new work, which is one of the delights of going to see the show, is how, and this is the merit of temporary exhibitions, is that putting them on changes our perceptions of works that we might have been quite familiar with, and we see new things. And that was, something that I experienced going around your exhibition. I think I've been 3 times now, and I'm still seeing new things that I didn't realize. And there are some wonderful sequences of hangs. We talked on the study day about La Muta and the way that has been framed on either side by 2 very revealing drawings. And so I just recommend, if you haven't been to see the show, go. If you have been, go again. It's one of those shows that's worth seeing again. And it's going to be a long time before we get this sort of collection of really exquisite paintings by Raphael in one place. And I think it does achieve what you set out to do, which is this sense of the universal artist. Could we say that it shows, to use a slightly trendy contemporary term, that Raphael was an intermedial artist? That, to some extent, that was one of the things driving this incredible stylistic development. He's only in his late 30s when he dies, and yet very few artists in the 16th century make such a journey from his roots in Urbino through to the styles, plural, that he's developing in Rome at his death. And one of the things that I started thinking about was that in addition to the story of influence and absorption and competition with great names like Leonardo and Michelangelo, that what your show brought out was, firstly, that Raphael was always collaborating with other artists, and there are lots and lots of examples from his early career of him doing that, but also this process of translating back and forth between mediums is one of the things driving him. So
that's a very good moment for me to leap back in, Ben, and to ask you to go forward one more slide. certainly, I referenced the importance of getting tapestries for what we were trying to do. Clearly, being able to show Raphael as sculptor was also, or as designer for sculptor, was also essential. And so these two bronzes, or there are two, I'm showing one from the Abbey of Chiaravalle outside Milan, were very important, because we could also show them with the drawings where you see Raphael designing for the bronze and thinking about how to work that. And I suppose why I see that as a linked thing is I became increasingly aware of those crossovers, the intermedial element I think you wanted to stress, Ben. So I'm not yet aware of an offset drawing, i.e. where a drawing is reproduced by pressing a possibly dampened sheet against another chalk drawing in order to make a reverse impression of it. I'm not conscious of that happening before Raphael, and it starts to happen when Raphael is designing for media that will involve the inversion of his design. It will come out the other way around, so he wants to see that happen. But it also comes when he's working with printmakers. In other words, when he's got a press available, and the sense of potentially experimenting and seeing that, well, let's see what happens if we put one drawing on top of another into a press. So absolutely, I think this sense of how his art responds to that sense of experimentation is fundamental.
As he, even with something like the Saint Cecilia altarpiece, where you've got like the ultra realism of the instruments, and then a sort of idealized figures of the saints, and then above with the heavenly scene, a completely different style. So there's three different registers of naturalism in the same picture. That seems to be a prospect that opens up when he becomes aware that you can achieve different effects in tapestry or in sculpture, or working with someone like Marc Antonio, who was a goldsmith before he was a printmaker. So that's an interesting section you didn't talk about much, is Raphael's work for making metal plates and goblets.
Absolutely. It's so frustrating that so much of that has now been melted down or lost along the way, meaning that we have to essentially reconstruct that aspect of his career from drawings and from prints after things that Raphael clearly designed. And again, it seems that contact with goldsmiths started very early in his career, including an Umbrian collaborator, Cesarino Rossetti, author of this bronze here, but with whom he plainly had contact right back to his time in Perugia. And yes, the sense of collaboration with these other artists, but also design for those other arts is something we very much wanted to spend time on.
And to those listening, if you're interested to know where Tom discovered some of these rather obscure characters, even to experts working on Raphael, he's done so much archival research, and he's very generously put it all on the internet. So you can go to Tom's website and read your way through all of Raphael's documents, many of which you've discovered yourself, Tom. So
that's very kind. But what's the phrase? Pygmies on the shoulders of giants, or something like that. I'm going to suggest we go forward a slide or two, and I'm also keen that we should then come to talk about Ben's exhibition and some of the differences of approach. I put this slide in because I wanted to come back to how we represent Raphael as architect. I said perhaps slightly loosely that he wasn't somebody who did technical drawings. Well, he plainly could do technical drawings. This one on the left for the Chigi Chapel in Santa Maria del Popolo has his handwriting on it, and it's a carefully measured drawing. Not perhaps the easiest and most delightful object to look at in an exhibition. We were much more interested in some of the more, I'm going to say, theatrical or kind of descriptive drawings, such as this is now a detail of a drawing which may have been made for a stage set. And then this last set of slides of mine were really to think about Raphael and, well, I suppose it does lead us into workshop. So having said that we weren't trying to do workshop kind of is a major presence in the later career. The moment you talk about collaboration, you almost invite that. The Fornarina, famous picture from the Galleria Barberini in Rome, very important loan to us, apparently signed by Raphael in this armband, usually associated with 18th century, let's call it myth-making about his girlfriend in Rome. But a strangely cool and distancing representation for all its intimacy, compared to, if we go forward a slide, the spectacularly beautiful portrait of La Velata, the mysterious veiled woman from Florence, who is plainly completely at ease in Raphael's company. I was looking at this picture recently, and I'm pretty sure in my own mind that quite a lot of the paint around her collarbone has been worked with his hand and not with a brush. One senses that this is a modelled picture, and I find them chalk and cheese in terms of intimacy and also actually in terms of quality, which perhaps is my way of hinting at, but not saying directly, that I have some pretty major doubts about the Fornarina. I see Ben smiling, so I shall move on a slide to the Ezekiel, which is my last, as it were, poser for 10, I think, starter for 10 type question. This was important to us for its role in the design of the Madrid tapestry, which itself has got a complicated issue. For me, it is almost certainly the work of Giulio Romano. There's something about the sense that each of these figures has had 2 or 3 pumps of the bicycle pump too many in blowing up the arms and the rest of the forms. Very beautiful, executed the highest quality, but for me, probably based on a Raphael design, but at that point passed to his most trusted assistant to be worked up. Now, I know if we go forward, not 1 slide, but 2, we come to the first of Ben's.
Yes, well, shall I take over from you there, Tom? And perhaps we can come back to issues around attribution if people in the audience would like to hear more. I do share your views on the Fornarina. So this slide is introducing how Catherine Whistler and I approached curating a drawings exhibition of Raphael, and that was possible because the Ashmolean has the largest collection of drawings by Raphael, and agreed to work with the Albertina in Vienna, which has the second largest. So when 2 collections come together to collaborate in that way, you have the basis for a pretty spectacular show, and then other lenders very generously came in. This was one drawing, however, that we were not able to include in the show, and so it shows how sometimes the ones that get away are quite fundamental to how you conceptualize your approach, which was to emphasize the eloquence of drawing. So unlike Tom's show at the National Gallery, we decided to just have works by Raphael and just have works by as just drawings. So we didn't include any other media, but there was one engraving that was included for the Massacre of the Innocents. And the idea was to look at drawings as eloquent objects in their own right, and as the testing ground really for Raphael's interest in being a figural artist in a double sense. So his starting point is often the human figure, and then there's this sense of figure as in rhetoric, which is a deviation from normal usage in order to make a bigger impact on the audience. So one use of these figures or tropes might be a dinner tone, or the inexpressibility trope, which is to say, I've got no words left to express my horror or my awe or my excitement. And so here we see St. Paul rending his garments because he can't find the words to express what Raphael was able to express through a drawing. And so that sense of Raphael's immersion in a culture of rhetoric, and also how he tested to the limits ideas that he had inherited from other artists, from his own practice, was what was driving our interest in Raphael as a draftsman. So if we move on a slide, here I'm comparing that relatively late drawing at the Getty with a drawing, again, we didn't show this, but Tom has it in his show, from Lille, which is one of the earliest surviving drawings by Raphael. And if you look at the figure that is the angel at the bottom left, you can see that the pose is not dissimilar from the Saint Paul. There's that habit of looping his drapery folds around a flexed right knee that he probably picked up from looking at antique statues, but is also a sort of one of the habits that he has when he picks up something to start to draw drapery. And there we can see that he does return, like an orator returns to a commonplace, to forms that he first developed as a very young artist. So those sort of continuities, as well as developments, were what we were interested in exploring. So if we go on a slide, here we can see Raphael pushing the body to its extreme, and here I'm comparing this with the discobolus, which Quintilian talks about, not in the sense that Raphael is responding to this discobolus, but it's this sense of pushing the body to the limit of what would be naturalistic. If you're feeling fairly supple, a fun game is to play Raphael yoga, which is to try and adopt some of the poses that seem so natural. This is excruciatingly painful to hold for any length of time, and so it's hard to imagine a life model assuming this pose. And I suspect that the area of around the loincloth, which seems a little bit unresolved, suggests that he may have thought in terms of two different halves, which is something we see Raphael doing quite often, which is fitting together, cutting and pasting figures. So if we move forward, here we see Raphael on the right, looking at Leonardo da Vinci, making a few edits that correct Leonardo. He didn't quite like the counterpoise knees, so he shifted them slightly, and he also made the feet a bit shorter. It doesn't come across in the slide very well, but if you look at the drawing, you can see that he has the confidence to correct Leonardo, and then flipping that figure over, as Tom was saying earlier, the reversal of the image is something that he's aware of. We find him moving towards this later drawing on the left, a study of a woman and a child, which is sometimes said to be a preparatory drawing for a print of Venus and Cupid, but it's an extraordinary drawing, I think probably not directly related to the print, but part of a process of generating new forms that might have led to a number of different projects, including the Massacre of the Innocents. But if you look at the line that crosses the belly of the nude woman, you can see that Raphael has actually literally cut and pasted two drawings together, and I think it's Raphael who's done this, and so we can see him thinking about how he develops as a draftsman, reversing, recombining units, and that inventiveness and that ability to absorb and critique and adapt, and how drawing was at the heart of what he was doing is what we were interested in focusing on in our show. So I'll show you very quickly the room plans if we move on. Oh, sorry, this is one last drawing where we can see Raphael working additively. So he many of the drawings are layered, so he draws with a stylus that leaves a barely discernible indentation in the paper and starts with the upper half of the central figure's torso, and then basically builds around that additively and often reactively. So a figure is seen from the front, he'll create a figure seen from the back, and so on. So this process of inventing is something we were very interested to try and tease out and explicate. So if we go forward, yes, this is the show. Visitors welcomed by possibly a self-portrait of Raphael. So we started the show with a drawing from the Ashmolean collection and ended it with one. And these are early works, and on one wall we tended to put Madonna and Childs, on the other struggling heroic male nudes, and they sort of met in the next room in the Massacre of the Innocents. So if we move forward, here we can see the room from another view. Wonderful working with designers who thought through all the possibilities of double-sided drawings and the color scheme as well. So this room is, roughly speaking, invention, and then the second room is composition, and the third room is expression, the three main areas of rhetoric. So if we go forward again, this sort of bridging section brings together the Madonna and Child motif and the heroic male nude in all of the drawings for the Massacre of the Innocents print, which is also in the National Gallery show, and a couple of the drawings that we showed are on display in London too. And then if we move forward again, there's just another view of the Massacre of the Innocents. If we go forward again, here we see the drawings that were mostly related to the murals and the stanza in the Vatican. And going forward, we see some from another view. It was quite difficult lighting this room. Lighting is always a difficulty when putting together an exhibition. The ceiling is higher in this room, and so there were quite a lot of shadows. And then again, we introduced at this stage some information about drawing techniques and encourage people to have a go at drawing. The idea being that we didn't want to overburden people visiting with technical knowledge, so that looking at the drawings became like an exam. You know, is this a metal point or is this a pen and ink? What we really wanted was for people to respond emotionally to the drawings. So they're very exciting, they're full of inventiveness and creativity. And then having got excited, hopefully this was the right point to introduce technique. And then moving forward, the final room is about it's roughly chronological, and then we move into Raphael's drawings in Rome, culminating in the great drawings for the Transfiguration. So if we move forward again, I think the final slide there shows you that room. Now, we tried to avoid questions of attribution. We chose drawings that mostly people thought were by Raphael. But at this stage, with the workshop in Rome towards the end of his life, it's very hard to get away from them. So if we move forward one, here's one where not everybody agrees that this is a Raphael. And we wanted to include it because I think both Catherine and I and Akim, our co-curator in Vienna, thought that it was close enough to what Raphael was doing in accepted Raphael drawings to merit putting it in and seeing if other people would agree with us or disagree in an interesting way. So yes, it's you try and avoid attribution, but it keeps coming in at the back window, and it's particularly hard to avoid it with Raphael's later workshop. Which I suppose, if I pass back to you, Tom, I mean, how important is it really? I mean, it fascinates experts whether something is Giulio or Raphael, but it's all Raphael in terms of the brand, isn't it?
Well, I agree, and I didn't want to get bogged down in those issues of attribution. To repeat myself, what we wanted was people to have an idea of what Raphael was producing. And because that was the starting point, if around the margins there are some areas where, again, rather like this drawing, one might include or one might exclude it, but that we all agree it reflects his overall drive and direction of travel, then for me that was satisfying the ambition. It doesn't always work. So the Rome 2020 exhibition, which gathered a huge number of great things and had all the advantages of being in Rome, what they could call upon there, was also very keen to have everything called Raphael and everything presented as by the artist. And I do feel that these matters of attribution do matter at the level of what conception of the artist you have in your mind when you walk out of the door. If everything you've seen is called Raphael, but only half the world's experts would accept that, it kind of slightly confuses the picture. But I don't want to go down that wormhole too much. Ben, your exhibition in Oxford and Vienna was absolutely spectacular, and it was so interesting to bring in a way of approaching these drawings which had not really been done before at all. There were some bold decisions, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, and it genuinely challenged the paradigm about how people think about these drawings. It was also a wonderfully inclusive exhibition in terms of the different range of discussions that you managed to host within it. I particularly enjoyed an encounter when you had artists coming in as well. I think you had the session with some doctors, if I remember rightly. So different approaches and different audiences, but all driven by seeing that this is a great artist, however you cut the cake.
Yes, that was something that was part of our curating process, was that we wanted to hear from all sorts of people, certainly other Raphael scholars, and what we did was based on our knowledge of what other scholars had done, but we wanted to hear from poets and neuroscientists. So a cognitive neuroscientist had some very interesting things to say about focus and what do we focus on instinctively, and that Raphael had an amazingly good understanding of that, and that he was exploiting, possibly unconsciously, things that we intuitively do in terms of our focus, or indeed having contemporary artists come in. So it was such a privilege to work with people like Stephen Farthing, with Humphrey Ocean, and with Jenny Saville, and say things like, well, obviously Raphael started up at the top left-hand corner here, and have Stephen say, why is that obvious? It seems to me he started at the bottom right, and to sort of think through with an artist the process of making a drawing was really revealing, and that was great to be able to do that. And that all did feed into the choices we made, and also the sort of descriptive writing that we decided was the way we were going to try and interpret and give people something to react to.
I think that's also a very nice point, Ben, because all this preparation goes forward to the opening of a show, but at that point it stops being your baby or my baby, and it becomes there for everybody else. And I think one of the great pleasures in both these exhibitions actually has been seeing how much people have been enjoying the spaces, enjoying the groups of work, concentrating on things. And yes, I've equally been doing visits with a number of people from different spheres, and the conversations are fascinating. And like you, I think I've been more than 3 times, but learning something new absolutely every time I cross the threshold. And I have a notebook bulging with ideas for, I'm not going to say the next exhibition because that might be presumptuous, but at least for the next time I'm thinking about these things.
Yes, and I think you and I both are great Raphael believers, but the sense that he has something relevant to say to people today is, and that was something I first noticed going to your earliest exhibition, the one you did with Carol Platzotta and From Urbino to Rome, was seeing students going around and being really excited by the drawings. And the sort of conventional wisdom was that young people didn't like Raphael. And yet when they were actually confronted with Raphael, he's a very exciting artist.
Claudia, the moment we start talking about what people think and kind of their experiences, it strikes me as the moment to ask you to chair questions from others.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you. Really, really illuminating discussion, and it was wonderful to hear your insights on these 2 very different exhibitions. So thank you very much. And yes, to everyone listening, you're really welcome to leave questions in the Q&A box, and we can discuss those. I just wondered, I mean, this is something we touched on just as we were meeting beforehand, but I was saying, I was really struck actually, Ben, by your discussion around the drawings and sort of the importance of having different groups of people responding emotionally to them. But I just wanted to think a bit about the Madonna and Child room, the room in which in the National Gallery exhibition, in Tom's exhibition, where you bring together these incredible treatments of the Madonna and Child from different collections. And I was there with my 2-month-old baby, so maybe particularly attuned at that moment, but they felt to me so distinctive, such distinctive treatments of that subject, which is obviously ubiquitous in the period at least. So I just wondered what I mean, I read a little bit in the exhibition around Raphael losing his mother at a young age, but could you shed any particular light on his approach to painting that subject, but perhaps also his sort of his spiritual commitments in relation to the figure of the Divine Mother also?
I launch in on that, Ben. I mean, I think that Raphael was once known as the painter of the pretty Madonnas, and I think that was probably one of the things that made him a bit of a turn-off for much of the 20th century. And yet, if you actually look at how he approaches that subject, it's always the same subject, even if it's, you know, an extra figure or two are added. And yet, even in a room like that, what you see at once is every time he paints it, it's a completely different picture. There is no one ideal who is just trotted out. The ideal changes all the time. And the extraordinary observation from a painter who starts painting the subject as a boy, really, and never has children of his own, and yet can observe that relationship and feel into its significance, and in overlay upon that the religious significance that this particular subject required of him, is one of the reasons Raphael is such a great artist. And it's very hard not to relate that to losing his mother age 8 and being orphaned completely age 11. So in that sense, it does feel very, very much like it's a strong subject for him, and a subject which he felt great empathy. And I think empathy genuinely is one of the strengths of Raphael throughout. As to his own faith, that's a much harder question to answer and a much more nuanced picture over time. I think I would probably not go down that right now, sticking with his capacities to think into this subject rather than to come from a particular starting point, really.
Thank you. Yes.
I think that Raphael's variety here is remarkable, but it's also something that is there in the culture that he's operating in too. So he's responding in part to innovations that he can see in his contemporaries and artists who came before him. And in that respect, I suppose the Western Catholic Church is very different from the Orthodox Church, where you get the St. Luke Madonna and Child repeated over and over again. So that's something that Akim suggested. This is our colleague at the Albertina, which is that there's almost like unintended theological consequences of the innovation that the artists are introducing into the Madonna and Child relationship. So it's like the most basic narrative, but it's a complicated one because both the child is God in human form, but completely helpless while being all powerful. And the mother is both caring, but knows, as the child knows, that she's going to have to let go of him. So while carrying the child, there is often that pensive quality which we see in the Madonna as painted by Raphael and Bellini and other great Madonna painters, that makes it an infinitely fascinating subject, one that we can relate to on a human level, but it also has quite profound religious nuances there. So I think Raphael was one of the people who, whether he was deeply religious or not, we just don't know, did develop and nuance one of the great religious themes.
Thank you both. That's really, really fascinating answers, and because they do feel so intimate and powerful. Each painting feels so new in its treatment of the subject. So thank you. I just see a question here asking whether you could say more about the Fornarina, which I'm just reading this out, which juxtaposes dramatically with the other portraits in this room and not to its advantage in the view of James Kempton.
I may have said my piece on this, but essentially I completely agreed, and I described it in terms of this sense of distance and lack of intimacy, and a kind of formality in the mode of painting. And for my own analysis of that picture, I would probably take it more towards Giulio Romano, at which point there are a number of comparable pictures. One is in the Pushkin in Moscow. There are also other versions of the Fornarina known in Rome in the, from the 16th century. Some of these seem to be essentially a form of advertising for a category of very high-class courtesans in Rome who are an extremely powerful group. And that's probably how I see that picture. That said, a colleague asked me to rethink it in terms of essentially response to sculpture and potentially being an idealized portrait. And I'm still working through the how that might change the analysis. I haven't completely reached a landing point.
I think I would agree that it looks more like a Giulio Romano. And when I saw it in Rome, where it usually hangs in the Palazzo Barberini, it's nearby a Giulio Romano Madonna and Child, and it looks like the same hand to me. I'm quite attracted to the idea that it's a sort of tribute to Raphael, alluding to a story in Pliny, in Pliny's Natural History, that Alexander the Great is reputed to have given his girlfriend Campaspe to the painter Apelles when he saw Apelles' painting of Campaspe naked, because it showed that he had a greater appreciation of her beauty. And that could be an elegant way of complimenting Raphael, possibly posthumously or towards the end of his life.
Thank you, thanks. There's a follow-up question to your discussion around the Madonna paintings, as to whether they would have been painted with life models, from life models rather.
So it's very clear that Raphael had no access to female life models at the beginning of his career, and completely clear that he did have access to female life models from the middle and throughout up until the end of his career. So I think one would say yes, based on life models.
I mean, certainly the drawings show him both looking at life models and then drawing from memory and innovating. The sort of, in the push and pull between abstraction and there's a certain sort of geometrical clarity that underlies a lot of what Raphael does, and his attention to what he can see. I mean, it's hard to draw a living baby, but he clearly has observed them very carefully, and so I think it's a combination of the two. Some of the poses that the Madonna gets into are actually pushing at the limits of decorum, and the Alba Madonna being an example of that. So the drapery plays quite an important role there too, in sort of toning down the gymnastics of some of the poses, and they would have had to been thought through in terms of a life model, though that might have been one of the garzoni or boys in his workshop.
Thank you, thanks. Yeah, I really enjoyed your close readings, Ben, of the drawings, and sort of, you know, hearing more about that, the additive process of making the drawings. And it's often seen as to be the place where you notice Raphael's sort of conversation with Michelangelo and with Leonardo, and that sort of the way that he's absorbing them as models, but also completely making the works his own. And can you see the drawings as conversations in that way? Is that where that sort of almost sort of thinking through drawing takes place? Or
absolutely, I think that's where we can see it most vividly. And I like to think of Raphael's how he deals with influence in the way that Michael Baxendale describes influence in his book Patterns of Intention, which is that it's not something that happens to you, but it's something that you choose to do with another artist's work. So Raphael quite intentionally chooses to engage with Leonardo or with Michelangelo, and whether he's actually standing in the square in Florence drawing the David from an oblique angle, or whether he's doing it from memory, is something that we will never be able to fully establish. I suspect it's the latter, but
certainly when you get drawings such as the British Museum sheet, where Michelangelo's statue of David seems to have taken half a pace forward, you get exactly that sense of dialogue at that point, that the starting point is clear, but it's moved forward in some way. And I think the slide you had of the drawing we also have from the Royal Collection in our show of the drawing of the Leda is exactly right in terms of dialogue with Leonardo, not just, as it were, copying from.
Thank you. This is a comment following up on the Madonna ongoing Madonna and child discussion from Susan Wilson, and she's just noting that from a sort of a woman's perspective, perhaps many women artists will assert that something different, I suppose, about having drawn, she says, my own living babies for years. I can't say I agree. I think many women artists will assert this. And she notes that a touring show which addressed this in the 90s called Reclaiming the Madonna. So if anyone's interested in following up on that, they might like to have a look there. But perhaps just a last question that's come up around Raphael's favorite drawing medium. Was sanguine Raphael's favorite drawing medium?
One for you, Ben.
Well, his drawings are hugely different in terms of different techniques. So, I mean, certainly red chalk is one of the techniques that he excels in, particularly towards the end of his career in Rome. And some of the most exciting drawings are in that technique. And it's interesting that as he becomes almost supernaturally assured as a draftsman, rarely making a mistake, he will do a sort of elaborate drapery drawing. It's almost like walking through a maze blindfold backwards. If you try to copy some of these drawings, they're just stunningly achieved. Some of those are in red chalk, but he trained with metal point. He's one of the artists who doesn't give up metal points, so he sticks to that. And there is this tendency to draw with the stylus on untreated paper, so that the drawings are almost like archaeological digs, and some of the conservation work, and I don't really understand myself the ins and outs of looking at things in different lights and so on, but they are revealing aspects of the drawings that we can't see with the naked eye. So I think if I had to, you really forced me to choose, I'd say probably metal point, because it was the one that he kept going back to.
I think I would only add that he uses such a range of techniques, often on the same sheet. I'm not saying it's casual, but I do think it would be hard to say he had a favorite because he reaches for different things at different times, and sometimes reaching for what is closest to hand.
Thank you. Well, we've probably probably have to draw to a conclusion here, but I want to thank you both for such a fascinating discussion, really illuminating, and for sharing your expertise. Really, really much appreciated, and lots of expressions of appreciation from our audience already in the chat box for you to see. So thank you both, and I'll just encourage everyone to go and see the exhibition, Tom's exhibition at the National Gallery. It's really transformative and really moving. So thank you very much for that too.
Thank you very much for having us.
Bye all. Thanks, Dan.
Bye bye. Thank you.